Hello and welcome to our 7-8 minutes of weekly Torah talk. With us today, Rabbi Brian Strauss. He is from congregation Beit Yeshurun in Houston, Texas. Hello, Rabbi. Thank you for being with us.
It's a pleasure. I always love reading you, and I follow the LA Jewish Journal a lot. So it's an honor to see you on Zoom and to share a little Torah with you.
That's great. And our Parsha is Parshat Re'eh. In this Parsha, there are many topics. I'll just mention a few of them. Blessings and curses should be proclaimed on two mountains, Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval, when the people of Israel cross over into the Holy Land. A temple should be established in the place that God will choose to make dwell his name there, where the people should bring their sacrifice to him. A false prophet, or one who entices others to worship idols, should be put to death. The mitzvah of charity obligates a Jew to aid a needy fellow with a gift or a loan. And our Parsha concludes with the laws of the three pilgrimages, the festivals of Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot that we are all familiar with. The first pasuk of our Parsha says, Re'eh anochi noten lifnechem hayom bracha uklala. Behold, I set before you today a blessing and a curse. So, Rabbi, let's begin with the curses. God basically tells us you should do this or else. So, what kind of thing this is? Aren't we supposed to do mitzvot because we want to do mitzvot and not because we are threatened with punishment?
No doubt the ideal, right, is to do the mitzvot not for the reward, but simply because it's the right thing to do. For the award, out of love for God.
Right.
That's the ideal. But then there's the reality. The famous Pirkei Avot that teaches us, don't be like servants who serve the master in the expectation of receiving an award, but right, be like the servants who serve the master without expectation of receiving an reward. But then it ends, but let the fear of heaven be upon you. Uh-huh. So even though the Pirkei Avot says, don't do it with an expectation of reward, it still has to throw in, let the fear of heaven be upon you. And our commentators pick up on that. The Bartanora, he says something very interesting. He quotes the Jerusalem Talmud that says, serve out of love, but also serve out of fear. Because if you serve out of love, if you're on the verge of hating, know that you're a person who loves, for the one that loves does not hate, but serve out of fear. For if you verge on rejecting, know that you are fearful, for one who is fearful doesn't reject. And so Bartanora says, based on the Jerusalem Talmud, you need to have both. And of course, the Rambam picks up on this, ever the rationalist, right? He even blames a lack of belief in reward and punishment is leading to complete abandonment of the Torah. And he says that fear is a great pathway with the negative commandments, and all the more so with the irrational commandments. So I think our rabbis often say, yes, the ideal is do it for just because you're a Jew. It's the right thing to do, right? Follow God. But the reality is with human nature, you need a little fear too. And perhaps it's the same today, right? I mean, it's...
Or even more so today. Even more so today.
Yeah. Human nature hasn't changed much.
So if we are mentioning human nature, there is another part in our Parsha that I often find puzzling, and that's the part about a false prophet. Human nature is that we follow leaders and we tend to believe in things and in people who sound smart or come up with new ideas. Or come with proof that their truth is the actual truth. So how can we avoid false prophets? What are the signs that we should follow?
It's a good question, and it's a big warning in our Torah portion. And the concern is that this false prophet, even though he or she may have marvels and miracles and can perform all these incredible things, if they're getting you, their goal is to get you to worship a false god, you must quickly walk away. Get rid of them. They're not to be believed, because no true prophet would want you to violate laws of the Torah, right? No true prophet would want you to worship an idol, even temporarily, right? So that's the sign. But what can we do in our day and age, for example? How can we know? Because we probably don't have prophets that are asking us to worship idols. But how do we identify it? And I think we can also look to our tradition, because the false prophets are usually the people that it's not about becoming better people. It's not about becoming more moral or more ethical. It's about worshiping them, or it's about worshiping the idols of our day and age, money, fame. They pit us against other people. It's identity politics, if you will. And it's not about becoming more righteous and better people. Because a true prophet, if we look at our tradition, the true prophets are the ones that speak about morality, monotheism, about values that have eternal values that have kept our people around. They're about reminding us that it's not our military might, it's about our ethical might, our spiritual might that allows us to continue and to thrive as a people or as a country. So it can still be very easy to identify a false prophet. What is their goal? Where do they want to bring us to? And I think we have to look at that to help us figure out who are the true prophets and who are the false prophets. And remember, too, like in our tradition, the true prophets were the ones who didn't necessarily yield a lot of power themselves.
Right.
They're the ones who were often disregarded, like Jeremiah, as we learned about a couple of weeks ago, thrown in jail, abused, made fun of, ridiculed. I found a great quote. Kierkegaard once said, "When a king dies, his power ends. But when a prophet dies, his influence begins." And so who are the true prophets? They're the ones that aren't in it for themselves. They're in it for the long haul. They're in it to create a lasting legacy that can really inspire us to be better people.
Would you say that what the Torah really tells us is not to believe prophets unless they tell us what we already know, what's in the Torah?
I think that's part of it, but I think there can be prophets today. They may not always tell us what we already know. They may help us remember what we've lost. They may help us recall what we've forgotten. The best prophets, I think, are the ones who can say to us, can speak to us, who can uplift us. Not, they may rail against us. They may give us a little tokacha, if you will. But I think they're ultimately there to help us remember what are those values that really allow us to succeed and to create a better society for us, as Jews, or, for example, here in the States right now. We need more prophets.
And these prophets, when they warn us from worshiping idols, does it refer only to the idols of the ancient Near East, the idols whose names we see in the Torah, or do we also refer to what we would call today the idols of modernity?
I think so. I think, obviously there were different types of idols back then. I don't think we're going to find any false prophets out there today wanting us to worship rocks or, statues, but they would want us, I think, to worship objects, values that are much more dangerous than those stones.
If we worship our phones, for example, or if we worship television, or
I'll tell you, I have to remind people the hardest part of my job is not getting people to believe in Judaism. It's to get them to want to even come to services, because there's so many other things they can watch on their phones or on their Netflix accounts or Hulu accounts or Peacock accounts. There's all these streaming services, and especially during this pandemic. We're not competing against other religions. I'm not competing against other movements. I'm competing against reminding people that ultimately it's not about following these false prophets, if you will. It's about following God, who's kept our people alive for so long. And it's about following these values that's kept them alive for so long. And it's not remembering that we have something to share that can really influence their lives for the better. But it's not about me. It's not about necessarily about them. It's about reminding them that there is a God who can teach them to be better people.
With that, we can conclude our conversation. That's the best way to conclude any conversation. Rabbi, thank you so much, and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun, and good Shabbos.